General Hospital spoilers reveal that in a city defined by betrayals, redemptions, and the fragile threads of family, few moments have shattered expectations like the one unfolding now. Willow Corinthos, composed and resolute, has made a decision that cuts deeper than any confrontation. She no longer recognizes Nina Reeves as her mother. It's a decision not screamed in rage. So irreversible, Willow is no longer asking to be heard, to be understood, to be accepted. She is drawing a line. One that does not bend. One that Nina can no longer cross. What began as slow detachment has now solidified into disconnection. And in this disconnection lies one of the most painful truths Port Charles has ever witnessed. That not all blood bonds survive truth, and not all wounds are meant to heal. For years, Willow's identity was a question mark, tossed between secrets, betrayals, and the trauma of being raised under the manipulative grip of Harmony Miller. When the truth of her maternity was finally revealed, it should have been a moment of healing. A chance for both women to start again. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. Because Nina, in her desperation to reclaim lost time, never paused to consider that love, especially from someone like Willow, must be earned, not demanded. The sins of Nina's past, her toxic manipulations, her willful lies, and most damningly, Willow's silence has spoken louder than any scream. She no longer wants a relationship. Not as a daughter. Not as a friend. Not even as an acquaintance. The emotional devastation of this adjustment cannot be overstated. Nina is spiraling, blindsided by the clarity with which Willow has walked away. For all of Nina's flaws, she truly believed she could repair what had been broken. She had begged, apologized, pleaded for one more chance. But Willow, once the picture of patience, once the woman who gave forgiveness to even the most undeserving, has changed. She has drawn her line not out of spite, but out of necessity. And in doing so, she has shifted the very emotional architecture of her life. The consequences of this choice are already rippling through Port Charles. Carly, who had always been cautious around Willow's growing connection to Nina, now finds herself acting as a quiet buffer. She doesn't celebrate the rupture, but neither does she mourn it. To her, it's confirmation that some truths, when revealed too late and too recklessly, leave scars too deep to heal. Drew, on the other hand, has retreated into silence, his own guilt inextricably tied to Nina's fall from grace. He was not just her lover, he was her enabler. Her co-conspirator in the lies that ultimately destroyed any path forward between Nina and her daughter. But perhaps the most heart-wrenching perspective comes from Liesl. Once regarded with fear and suspicion, Liesl has emerged in Willow's life as a surprising sanctuary. In the wake of Britt's death, or her mysterious disappearance. Depending on which rumors you believe, Liesl has grieved with a ferocity few can understand. And now, with Willow leaning ever closer to her orbit. In that broken place, Liesl has offered what Nina never could, quiet understanding without expectation. Nina watches it unfold with helpless eyes, realizing that every step Willow takes toward Liesl is a step further away from her. What burns the most is that Willow's silence is not cruel, it is peaceful. They represent a seismic shift in Willow's worldview. This isn't just a decision to avoid toxicity. It's an identity change. Willow is rewriting what family means to her, not by clinging to the past. How long can Willow keep her heart barricaded? What happens if Britt is truly alive and re-enters the picture, shifting the emotional dynamics between Liesl and Willow once more? Could Nina claw her way back through selflessness, or is it already too late? These are the unknowns that now hover over Port Charles like fog, dense, suffocating, inescapable. But for now, one thing is certain. Willow has made her choice. She has looked into the eyes of the woman who gave her life and said, in every action and in every silence, you are not my mother. And in doing so, she has redefined what it means to protect oneself. This isn't rebellion. It's reclamation. It's the end of a story written in pain and the beginning of one forged in peace. But no matter how close she may physically be, emotionally, Willow is gone. And that loss is irreversible. Port Charles watches with bated breath. Not for reconciliation. Not for another second chance. But to witness the aftermath of emotional liberation and the strength of a woman who has finally decided to choose herself over the past. Because sometimes, the boldest act of love is knowing when to walk away. And for Willow, that time has come. Liesl's return to Port Charles marks not only a physical reappearance but the ignition of a profound psychological and emotional reckoning that threatens to unravel the fragile definitions of family. Navigating a crumbling relationship with Nina while silently seeking stability in a world that has taken too much and given too little. The connection between Liesl and Willow did not begin with affection, it began with grief. Britt's death, whether real or still surrounded by conspiracy, was the thread that silently tied them together. And now, in the void Nina left through lies and desperation, Liesl steps in, not to manipulate, not to reclaim power, but to quietly offer the one thing Willow has longed for all her life, truth without expectation. Willow has become the embodiment of restraint turned to steel. After the deception surrounding Drew, what matters now is not whose DNA runs in her veins, but who shows up without condition. Nina, in her spiral of possessiveness and false promises, has destroyed her last bridge. Willow has reached the point where silence speaks louder than reconciliation. And into that silence walks Liesl, not demanding entry, but simply offering presence. Liesl does not need to claim Willow as hers. She does not cry for forgiveness. She simply listens. And in doing so, she becomes something far more dangerous to Nina than an enemy. She becomes a surrogate. As Port Charles begins to feel the tension swell, those close to Willow notice the subtle changes. Liesl's name begins to appear more frequently in Willow's conversations. The private visits become more regular. The advice given in shadows becomes guidance accepted in the light. It is a relationship built not on years but on a shared language of sorrow, betrayal, and survival. Willow, who once opened her heart to Nina and was scorched by the fire of unmet expectations, now finds herself drawn to a woman whose flaws are worn on her sleeve but whose loyalty runs deeper than appearances suggest. Nina, watching from the outside, spirals. Her grip on sanity weakens with each sign of Willow's retreat. She confronts Carly, begs Michael, pleads with anyone who will listen that she deserves another chance. But the more she begs, is what signals the end. What began as Nina's dream of reclaiming a daughter has turned into a nightmare of losing her to the very woman she once considered dangerous. The irony is bitter. Her own pain from losing Britt becomes a language only Willow can truly hear. The grief that sits like stone on Liesl's chest finds relief in the quiet understanding between them. And perhaps, deep down, Liesl also sees in Willow the daughter she lost, the one taken by fate, now returned in a different form. As Liesl and Willow's bond deepens, other relationships begin to fracture. Carly is suspicious but cautious. Michael is supportive but worried. Drew sees a vacuum where control once existed and wonders if Liesl's presence might derail what little order they've managed to salvage. Meanwhile, Nina becomes increasingly unstable. Her behavior more erratic. She interrupts moments between Liesl and Willow, tries to insert herself where she is no longer wanted. She lashes out at Liesl, accusing her of stealing her place. But Liesl, with a calm that cuts deeper than any insult, tells Nina the truth: you cannot steal what was already abandoned. This truth echoes throughout the corridors of General Hospital. Nurses whisper, patients speculate, and doctors watch as the once loud conflict between Willow and Nina is replaced by the quiet certainty that a new maternal bond has been forged. The hospital, returning from his own battles, notices the difference immediately. He had expected to find Willow in turmoil, isolated. Instead, he finds her grounded, strong, focused. And he knows why. And he understands. He understands that this is not about justice or forgiveness. It is about survival. And Willow has chosen a path that allows her to survive without looking back. But the transformation is not without cost. Nina begins to act out, making bold, dangerous decisions. She pushes boundaries, threatens lawsuits, and tries to expose Liesl's past. She wants to tarnish the woman who took her place. But every move she makes only confirms to those around her that she is no longer motivated by love, but by obsession. And through it all, Willow grows. Her connection with Liesl deepens, becomes something more maternal than biological. She invites Liesl to Wiley's school events, asks for her guidance on motherhood. And Nina has been left outside the gates she once stormed, a queen without a crown, a mother without a child. And so the story evolves, not with explosions or trials. Liesl and Willow walk forward, not in defiance of Nina, but in defiance of the lie that biology alone defines love. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a new chapter, one in which Willow finally feels safe enough to say the word mother without hesitation. And when she does, it is not Nina's name she whispers. It is Liesl's. The story now unfolding in Port Charles is not merely about grief or vengeance but about the profound reshaping of identity, legacy, and maternal bonds. Among the most striking changes is Willow's quiet but powerful decision to accept Liesl as her mother in heart if not in blood, a choice born not from rebellion but from need, trust, and a growing bond forged in shared trauma. The emotional core of Willow, long battered by betrayals from Nina and the shadows of her painful past, has finally found a place of calm with Liesl. And as Willow heals, she begins to reach outward, not only to strengthen this newfound relationship but to regain the trust of those who once stood by her yet grew distant amid chaos. Her willingness to reconnect with Jason, to offer support in the tangled search for Britt, reveals a new Willow, steady, empathetic, and resilient. This transformation, however, does not exist in a vacuum. The emotional tremors of Britt's supposed death continue to ripple through Port Charles. Liesl's inability to accept her daughter's end has now converged with Jason's recent discovery of a woman in Europe who resembles Britt. Fueled by intuition and haunted by memories, Willow becomes an unexpected but vital ally. Her support offers Jason and Liesl the clarity and strength they both need. Not only to pursue the possibility that Britt is alive but to withstand the firestorm such a revelation could ignite. But as they dig deeper, there are whispers, unconfirmed, yet deeply disturbing, that Britt may have been taken not by death but by design. If her disease had begun to show rapid developments inconsistent with its typical progression, could someone have intervened? Could Britt have been removed from her life under the pretense of death to become a test subject in some rogue medical agenda? These questions no longer feel paranoid. They feel prescient. Jason, ever the protector, now finds himself in a place he never expected, partnered not only with Liesl but with Willow. The once fractured woman he barely knew now stands as a beacon of clarity, guiding him with logic and emotional insight. And for Liesl, the presence of Willow has become more than a balm. It is redemption. Liesl, long haunted by the things she couldn't prevent, now sees in Willow a chance to do right, not just for her, but for Britt. Together, the three begin to piece together timelines, question records, and trace the last known movements of Britt before her alleged death. What they find is chilling: inconsistencies in autopsy reports, missing surveillance footage from the night she vanished, and a private jet that left Port Charles hours after Britt's final appearance. The clues point toward Dubrovnik, a place that once meant nothing to them but now feels like the epicenter of a lie. Jason is ready to go immediately, driven not just by love but by purpose. Liesl, both terrified and hopeful, wants to follow but knows her presence could attract unwanted attention. And Willow, surprisingly, insists she must go too, not just as support, but because she believes Britt may be in a place emotionally and physically that only someone like her, someone who understands maternal pain and emotional isolation, can reach. It's a triangle built not of blood, but of mutual grief and conviction. Meanwhile, back in Port Charles, the temperature is rising. Nina watches as her place in Willow's life evaporates. Carly, seeing Jason's obsession rekindle, worries that his darkness may consume him again. Michael is torn between wanting to protect Willow and recognizing that she's found her strength not in retreat, but in action. And the hospital itself becomes a stage for whispers, theories, and increasing tension as questions about Britt's death, or disappearance, circulate once again. The deeper truth they seek becomes less about whether Britt is alive and more about what kind of condition she might be in. Brainwashed, or worse. And the fear that Britt's face might one day return to Port Charles with no memory of who she was becomes a silent terror for Liesl and Jason alike. Willow, however, remains hopeful. She believes in redemption. She believes that if they find Britt, even broken, even changed, they can help her rebuild. And more importantly, she believes that families are not always born but chosen. Her support for Liesl is no longer passive. It is active. She begins working at the hospital again, seeking access to genetic research files, quietly monitoring case studies, and using her position to scan for anything that might hint at Britt's condition. She becomes the bridge between past and future. Between Jason's unrelenting pursuit and Liesl's maternal fear. As the trio prepares for the journey to Dubrovnik, Port Charles braces. Not just because of what they might find, but because of what their return might bring. If Britt is alive and altered, her reappearance could shatter the emotional balance of the town. Long-held truths will be questioned. Alliances will shift. Liesl's status as a grieving mother will become complicated. Jason's morality will be tested, especially if he's forced to choose between rescuing Britt and confronting those responsible. And Willow, already undergoing a personal renaissance, may emerge as the heart of this entire saga. For her, this is not about proving anything to Nina. This is not about vengeance. This is about stepping into her own power, about choosing the people who choose her, and about standing for truth even when it's uncomfortable. Her bond with Liesl is no longer tentative, it is cemented. She calls her mother, not in the shadow of Nina's rejection but in the light of Liesl's acceptance. And when they leave Port Charles together, it is as a family bound by purpose, not pretense. The story has changed. No longer a simple tale of grief and betrayal, it is now a saga of reinvention, of rising from the ashes, of chasing truth across oceans and borders. And as Jason, Liesl. But for the next explosion of truth that will redefine them all. The story of Willow stepping forward to bring Britt back has become one of the most unexpected yet emotionally charged developments to explode across Port Charles. In a town already trembling under the weight of secrets, betrayals, and obsessions, this new twist, that Willow, long considered fractured and estranged, would become the one to rescue Britt, has ignited a storm of madness, transformation, and long-buried truths. What began as a quiet shift in Willow's heart, a turning away from Nina and a cautious leaning into Liesl, has now erupted into a defining moment that threatens to upend every established dynamic. Liesl and Jason, each consumed by their own guilt and desperation, had never considered that it would be Willow who brought clarity to their chaos. Yet that is exactly what is unfolding. And the shock reverberates far beyond their immediate circle. This rescue is not simply a mission, it's a collision of grief and redemption. Jason, driven by visions of Britt alive and altered, afraid that the daughter she might recover could be unrecognizable, lost to some cruel experiment or manipulated identity. But Willow sees something they don't. She sees Britt not as a victim but as a survivor, someone who, like herself, was forced to reshape her identity through pain, who might still be fighting to return to herself from deep within. This belief fuels her, drives her actions with a calm intensity neither Jason nor Liesl possess. It is this steadiness, this refusal to be consumed by fear, that now turns the tide of their journey. The madness lies not in the possibility that Britt is alive, it lies in the cost of unearthing that truth. The deeper Willow, Jason, and Liesl dig, the clearer it becomes that Britt's disappearance was never a death but a calculated vanishing act, a forced removal engineered by forces far more powerful and shadowy than anyone imagined. Her identity splintered to suit someone else's design. And if that's true, the return of Britt is not just a personal triumph, it's a political and scientific bomb waiting to detonate in the heart of Port Charles. But the emotional shock, the real earthquake, is that Willow is leading this charge. The woman once crumbling beneath the weight of maternal abandonment and terminal illness is now the voice of conviction. She speaks with purpose, moves with certainty. And her loyalty to Liesl has evolved into a fierce sense of protection. She doesn't just want to bring Britt home, she wants to restore her fully, piece by piece, mind and soul. Willow is becoming the person no one expected, the one who brings peace to Jason's obsession, purpose to Liesl's grief, and fire to a town on the brink of another upheaval. The shock that grips poor Charles is real, palpable in every whispered conversation and sidelong glance. Mina watches from the sidelines. Begins to see Willow not as fragile but as formidable. Carly, ever protective of Jason, now finds herself questioning whether this new dynamic, this trio bound by loss and love, might be exactly what Jason needs to find himself again. And the hospital, once silent about Britt's death, begins to buzz with uncertainty as news of their journey to uncover her fate spreads. As Willow, Jason, and Liesl stand on the threshold of revelation, the implications are staggering. If Britt is found and saved, poor Charles will not return to normal, it will be forever changed. Lives will be unmade and remade. Power will shift. Old sins will be dragged into the light. And in the center of it all, Willow, no longer a bystander in her own life, will emerge not just as a healer but as a catalyst. Her belief in Britt's survival, her refusal to abandon hope. And ultimately, salvation. This is no longer just Jason's mission. It's not just Liesl's grief. This is Willow's story now, of choosing, of changing, of stepping into the fire to pull someone else out.